Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to What's in Store with the Niagara Framework. We appreciate you joining us today. I'm Mark Peacock, Vice President, Chief Marketing Communication Officer at Linkspring, and your host. Again, we appreciate you joining us. Couple housekeeping items. Yes, we are recording this, and it will be available on Linkspring's YouTube channel. And we have allotted some time for Q&A. Please utilize the Q&A function within this platform, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. Joining me today, I'm thrilled to have three folks from Tritium: Troy Finley, Kevin Mamachek, and Paul Pettigrew. Just to set the stage a little bit, as a partner for over 20 years, Linkspring works closely with Tritium to continually advance Niagara, to improve the platform and expand its scope. Our Genesis Edge portfolio is a good example of how we are doing this. In addition, we are doing our part to maintain and support Niagara to be the industry de facto standard within the built environment. Today, Niagara is approaching 1.2 million instances deployed globally. Niagara is the most widely deployed and accepted platform for connectivity, integration, control, diverse monitoring, automation, interoperability, collaboration, and data management for all buildings of all types and sizes. In today's presentation, we're going to share the new features and functions and value that is being added to the framework, including some highlights on release 4.2, highlights on release 4.13, our enterprise SMA management tool, updates on cybersecurity, something new, a Niagara 4 Venn driver for OpenADR 2.0. Really exciting as well is a look into the next generation Jace, the Jace 9000. And we'll touch upon what's expected for future releases. So without further ado, let's get started. Troy, I turn this over to you now.
Hi, everybody. Just real quickly, Troy Finley here, Business Development Manager at Tritium. I've had the pleasure of managing the partnership between Tritium and Linkspring for the last 8 years now, going on 9 years. So almost half of the life of the partnership. It's been a great ride. I'm not going to take a lot of time. We're gonna hit you with a fire hose this morning, and we're going to keep it high level, though the slides will have lots of content on them. So we encourage you to follow up with your Linkspring sales representatives for follow-on discussions. We'll be happy to schedule those along with Linkspring as needed. A lot of content coming at you. You probably saw some of this at AHR for those of you who attended and got to pass by and visit the Linkspring booth and the Tritium booth. So with that, Kevin Mamachek, manager of the sales engineers at Tritium, thanks for walking us through this deep content here.
All right. So it's definitely going to be a fire hose. I'm going to ask you to take a sip. So keep in mind that each one of these can almost take a half hour in itself. So we're going to kind of give you a broad stroke overview of why you kind of need to know what's happening with each of these pieces so that you can talk to your customers about the value of the different versions of Niagara or the new hardware or loyalty program or these new drivers that we have. So with that, let's kind of take a look at 410. Now, the one thing I want to kind of emphasize here is that a lot of our enterprise customers have asked Tritium to not bring out a version of Niagara every 6 months. We were on that cadence. So what we've done is we said, all right, let's look at what the industry does. They usually have long-term support releases. So what we've done is we've created a long-term support release in 410. So what I'll do is I'll kind of walk you through real quick, not in a lot of detail, what new features are in 410, because you'll probably have customers that are earlier than this. So we have a nice roadmap on the website that kind of explains what we've added into every version of Niagara 4. So that's a great way of kind of summarizing what to expect and what we've added and so forth. So keep that in mind. So 410 is this long-term release. When you look at how this works is that we will continue to do updates, which aren't feature updates, but they're actually fixes or security enhancements that we find in the industry. So as you adopt 410, you will have updates that are available. We're I think we're on update 4 or 5. So you'll continue to get those as we move through that long-term support. Now, eventually another version of Niagara will become the next long-term support, but we'll give you this long-term support all the way through this year. So some key highlights, right, is that one of the things that we've done in 410 in the beginning of that is we now have the ability to do tag-based graphics. So if you're designing PX pages, you no longer have to do the physical ORD on that design to display that piece of information. You can actually put the tag that's attached to that physical point and then create a generic version of that display that will fill in with the tags. So that was one of the big requests that we got from folks that, you know, what else could we use tags for? We understand that tags are for metadata, but can we use them in the systems? So the system DB and the virtuals and the tag-based graphics are all in 410 as a base there. So keep that in mind. We also needed to look at how things were being rendered, right? So in the early days, right, we were rendering everything on our JACEs or on our supervisor. But since then, the browsers have become so powerful. Wouldn't it be nice to tell Niagara, hey, go render all this in the browser, let the browser use its horsepower instead of using the JACE or the supervisor to render that image and then send it down the line. So one of the components that we have in 410 is this UX Media that does just that. Have the browser say, give it to me, I'll render it, I can do a much faster job. So that's a big thing for increasing space or increasing speed on those PX pages. Managers, so one of the things that you'll see in 410, in 412, and 413, everything is becoming HTML. And that's for a very good reason. And that is that we want to be able to do everything in the browser instead of actually loading up Workbench to do any of that engineering. So you'll see this is a trend. The tag manager was added in 410, and you'll see some additional HTML5 modules being added into the 12 and 13 release. But keep in mind that this is a fundamental push across Niagara to make sure that everything has an HTML component so that I can use just the browser to be able to engineer, monitor, look at, what have you. Connectivity. You're going to find that in the industry, you're going to hear people talk about BACnet Secure Connect and things of that nature. So what we wanted to do within the Niagara framework was to make these certificates a lot easier to manage. In fact, you'll see 413 actually, we've done a bunch of neat things to help manage this. So we understand that the complexity of all these devices, all these pieces of equipment out there going to need device certificates. How do we make this easier? How do we create a signing tool that lets me take a couple hundred JACEs and do a device certificate and sign it once, right? So these are components that you'll see each rev of Niagara we improve on because we're understanding how a typical protocol such as BACnet Secure Connect needs to access these certificates and how we want to make that workflow extremely easy in the Niagara framework. So you'll see a lot of things that every rev that we create of Niagara, we add more provisioning tools. And why this is important is that if you have a large enterprise and they have several 100 devices, you don't want to visit one device and then visit the next device to be able to update it. So we keep adding more and more provisioning components to the supervisor so that it can reach down in and manage all of those devices below it. And so you'll see that there's some new steps for edges. You'll see that, again, with the certificate management, we want to be able to automate that process of creating a certificate or renewing a certificate. So these processes are important for us to be able to manage these in a bulk way, right, in an automated way. And so the provisioning services, if you're not familiar with it, are extremely powerful in Niagara, and you should take a look.
And Kevin, I'd like to point out right there, that LinkSpring takes full advantage of that feature set with the fact that it's utilizing platform independent Niagara on its own hardware devices, and it facilitates that edge deployment extensively.
Mm-hmm. Yep. When you start to get lots of devices, you start to look for the tools that helps manage those things a lot easier. This is just kind of a warning or a public service announcement, but all of Niagara is code signed. What does code sign mean? Code sign means that we have a signature around that code so that we know if it's been tampered with. In fact, the JACEs won't start up if any of the core components have been messed with. So we've been doing that since the inception. What we're hearing from a lot of our enterprise customers is they would like all of the third-party modules to also participate in that code signing so that they know that a third-party module hasn't been tampered with. So today, we start up a JACE in what we call medium mode, which means it's going to yell at you. It's going to say, hey, you have this third-party module that's not signed. You should probably get it signed. We have the right in the future to flip it to high by default, but we haven't done that because we're actively working with our third parties to make those certificate signings pretty easy. And so right now we're in medium mode, but you can, as a integrator, right, flip that switch to high if you have a customer that says, no, I can't have any unsigned code. So this is one of these security things that you really want to adopt because it ensures that nothing malicious has gotten onto any type of device. So every computer, every operating system has a method of this, iPhones, right? So this is us following that standard. And then we're just telling everybody that we've put it to a point where it's going to start yelling at you that you should probably get these things signed. And you can just ask for your module provider to actually get that signature and install them. The JACE and the Niagara framework already understands how to look for them and how to confirm that they're valid. So that's just something that we've put out there to raise awareness, especially for those customers that need to have those signatures. Authenticators. This is another one of those things that every rev that we put out of Niagara, we add a few more. And so what happens is people have their Niagara and they want to be able to take some of that data and put it someplace else, right? They want to put it in a cloud. And everybody has a different cloud provider. So what we've done is we've worked with Amazon, we've worked with Microsoft. In this release, the Google Authenticator got some love, and so it makes it a lot easier for you to take a JACE and connect it to the Google Cloud. So you'll see a lot more of these as things come out, how we add a little more customization to the actual driver and not be so generic. So Google got the love. You'll notice that, let's go over here to software
Kevin,
support. Yes.
Sorry, Kevin, it's Mark. I just want to let folks know, LinkSpring is taking advantage of that, the MQTT, and you'll be seeing some new information about our E2E platform, in which we're connecting the Genesis Edges, the PC 8000s, and so forth into a cloud environment. So stay tuned for more. But thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, very good. So I get a lot of questions on these, and this is actually up on our website too, so you can pull them down. And it's, you know, what operating systems does your supervisor support, right? What SQL databases do the connectors connect to? So we follow the industry. We don't arbitrarily choose these. If Microsoft discontinues support for a certain version of their SQL server or their Windows server, we do too, right? It's just everybody follows that suit. So this is the kind of the current board on what everything has gone on support. So you'll see the lowest version of Windows Server is 2016. So 2012 got dropped. That's, again, Microsoft dropped it. So we no longer can support it because we can't get support on that internally. So this is just a checklist for you to go take a look at if somebody asks that. I always get it, you know, what do I fire up a supervisor on? Oh, but I will tell you, you see this Linux stuff? Take note of that, because there's something coming in 4.13 that's going to be kind of interesting. So, all right, so 4.12. All right, so 4.10, LTS, long-term support, continues to get bug fixes and security fixes, right? So an enterprise customer can adopt 4.10 and they'll get the security components that they need, especially when you have that software maintenance agreement in place. 4.12 is a feature release, meaning it's going to have some additional enhancements that 4.10 won't have. And if your customer needs to look at that or take advantage of that feature, that's why they would go to the 4.12. Okay, so we will only have one feature and one long-term support of Niagara at any given time. So if you notice this is 4.12, some of you might, well, what happened to 4.11? 4.11 was a feature release that ran alongside 4.10 as the long-term. Once 4.12 came out, that becomes the new feature release, and 4.11 moves off that list. Okay, it doesn't mean you can't run it. It just means that we are focusing on the 4.10 and the 4.12 in our engineering components and support and updates. So what does that mean for a release of 4.12? This is, you know, people essentially want to plan for when we have these update releases, right? So we already have an update release for 4.12 that just came out, I think, last week. And then you'll see that we'll continue to support that again through 2023. So this is more of a timeline of what we should expect in updates from Tridium for that particular version framework. So we have a lot of customers that like to see this in a slide and documented and so forth. So that's where that's going. So 4.12 builds upon a concept. And again, remember how I said HTML is going to be the component that essentially everything is being driven towards that web browser so that I can actually do engineering from the browser. So if you think about this, if you have customers that you need to go in and tweak some of the wire sheets, typically you would have to have the Workbench application loaded on a laptop. I'd have to punch a way into that infrastructure to be able to have access to it. Here with the web components, I can do all of that from the browser. And so if they've got a secure way of allowing me to access that network, I can use HTTPS to be able to connect to that particular JACE or supervisor and actually edit and change and work with the engineering tools that are available in Workbench as what they call the FAT application, right? This is a thin versus FAT. This gives us the ability to do the same type of work through that web browser. And this is important to start to understand. Once you start to get cloud components in there, this makes engineering a lot simpler. So WebWiresheet 2.0 is something that they've added a lot more features to be able to speed up some of the engineering work that's browser-based. Point Manager, right? This was again, if I have the wire sheets, I could do everything except bring a device in. So if somebody would go and install a device in the customer and I needed to discover it, I'd still need to have to fire up Workbench. So I'd have to have somebody on site do that. I couldn't do it remote. With this version, 4.12, I now have the ability to actually get to the device manager so that I can bring those points in. So that was another one of those little missing pieces that you were like, oh, I get it. Oh, I can't get it. I can't get the point. I can't get the device. And so now it's been added into there. Just like the searches, a lot of you do queries, queries. That was, again, a specific component that you could only do in Workbench. Now they have the web interface to that so that I can actually do that from the browser. So this allows me to go out and look for something that has temperature inside of its name from AHU01. So this gives us some of the sophisticated searching capabilities that we've kind of love and learned and love in Workbench. It now allows us to do that in the browser. So just like the Google Authenticator got some love, in this one, the Azure Authenticator got some love. So in 4.12, we've added some components that are specific to the Azure connection. And what I mean by love is essentially we had a generic MQTT driver that had a bunch of fields that were very generic. And you would have to know how to correlate what that field was to Amazon, or how it fit into Google, or how it fit into Azure. And so now with these specific drivers, we actually call out what this data is connecting to the back end of Azure. So it's a lot more clearer that if you've never set one of these up and you know you're connecting to Azure, exactly what it's asking for. So these are some of the processes that we've gone through and created for these. We started out saying, here, Microsoft, here's the source code, you should do this. What we found is it's a better experience that if we do this ourselves. So these are the drivers that you're seeing updated inside of Niagara in 4.12. So the other thing that you'll want to take note is prior to 4.12, if I wanted to call, let's say I had an IoT device that had some kind of API on the network and it doesn't have BACnet and it just kind of does its own thing, and I wanted to talk to it and bring some information into Niagara. Usually that's done through some sort of API, and you need to use a standard protocol such as HTTP to be able to talk to that API and get some answers back. So typically, we didn't provide this HTTP client, right? And so now with 4.12, that's actually part of core. So that is already in place and ready to go so that I can start to call these APIs. And these APIs could be devices on your network, or they could be cloud services, whatever it might be. But HTTP was one of the pieces of the puzzle that I needed to have in order for me to communicate to it. And so with it not being there, I had to do some extra work. I'd either have to know how to do some workarounds with some of our other drivers, or I'd have to get another driver just to be able to communicate to these devices.
An example of this might be a weather service out on the internet, right? We might want to grab some data from.
Sure. Good luck. All the weather services are being bought up by computer companies because they all want to know our location. But yes, that's what it is.
Right.
And we did fix in, I do believe, 4.9, our weather service, or actually the National Weather Service, you could not on a Niagara instance do HTTPS to that weather service through the proxy, and we've actually fixed that. So definitely in 4.12, I think it was at 4.9 that we actually did that. You can actually now gain access to that weather service if they run a proxy. So a lot of our factories have that situation. So the other thing that is very important to note with 4.12, so this is something that's very specific to 4.12. This is very specific to the Jace hardware, our Jace hardware. We were seeing, as we added more security features, that the serial bus with MSTP would start to slow down because we were doing a bunch of things to it, right? We were doing essentially a lot of securing of the core operating system, the core framework. So our engineers looked together and they said, well, you know what, we have a coprocessor that's inside of our Jace that we don't use. Why don't we offload the serial MSTP communication to that coprocessor? And that way it could just do its own thing, and then it can queue back in to Niagara. So they experimented with it. It actually worked extremely well. It is now part of 4.12, where Once I install it, it will go onto that Jace hardware and it will activate that coprocessor, and it will then offload that component of watching the MSTP bus onto the coprocessor. And so we're seeing great speed enhancements by offloading that to that processor on board. It's 412 that you need to be able to take advantage of that. Integration with our security surveillance. So you'll see a lot of every rev of Niagara, we add more HTML components to it, right? So part of the video framework is we needed to remove a lot of the dependencies of the Java and get those components to be HTML5, right? So a lot of that is actually been done in several different versions of Niagara to give you that total experience, that if I'm trying to use the surveillance components or the video cameras, it's all done now in HTML, and you could use your phone or your tablet to be able to do that. That's the goal, right? We didn't want to create something where I had to have a workstation to monitor it. I wanted to be able to get access to it anywhere that I was. So general components. So what this will come down to is I've tried to do some LDAP authentication, and you would be aware. And what happened would be that Niagara, when I would use this LDAP record, would only choose one of the profiles inside of Niagara itself, right? So if I had a profile that was open and then I had a profile that was a little more locked down, it would take the first one it sees, which usually means it's the wrong one. So what we had to do in 412 was we had to essentially merge those, which is a best practice in the industry. So now those components will actually merge those prototypes together so that it will take the most restrictive pieces of each. So this is a big thing that if enterprises are using LDAP, they've been asking us to look at this. So 412 will give us access to that. We are ready, I think since 4.9, we split out the security audit from the actual Niagara audit, right? So everything in Niagara is audited. If I change the temperature, it says, Kevin, change the temperature from this to this, right? So the security log, we were asked a while back to separate because they want to run the security log through software that monitors that. We now added the platform access to that security log. So prior to that, we monitored everything that happened to the station, and we were getting requests that we also want to see who logs into the platform. So that has been done, and we've got some nice security dashboard components that then display that, especially for hidden users. If you go in and hide a user, we explicitly call that out, that it has been hidden. So here we are at this again, third-party signing. 412 did not move that position. So you'll see 4.9 to 4.11, and now 4.12, we're still at medium. So we haven't raised the bar to high yet. We're just telling you that you should work with your third-party companies to make sure that those modules get signed, because this is a good thing to happen. And if you're with the government, they don't want any module to run that isn't code signed. Okay. There is some internationalization support. This is more towards the Workbench component, not necessarily lexicons inside a PX page. So we did add some more. This is usually, essentially we're doing some maintenance on this to make this much easier to port the platform or the Workbench into more languages. So again, every time we come out with a release, you'll see additional provisioning steps that will help make life even easier. So in this one, you'll see that we're able to update licenses now in a batch manner, right? So we can go out and capture all the devices, capture all the licenses, update those licenses all from the provisioning tool. We have the ability to grab, again, more certificates. With a lot of the Edge products, we actually could bootstrap the device. So even before it was commissioned, we could actually grab it, put a certificate on there, and you'll see those steps will actually be coming available for the Jace itself because of the requirements to do Secure Connect. So these are all good things that we add to the provisioning services. And for those that I never knew, so this is one of those things I never knew, our history names were limited to 44 characters. Don't ask me why, but we gave you now in 412 200 characters. And I was a computer science major, and 256, 255 was always a magic number, but I haven't gotten a good answer on why we didn't add 55 more characters to that. But this actually helps a lot of customers because they had to do some pretty tricky naming conventions to fit within that 44 character, and that has now gone to 200 on the expansion. No surprise here. So we added with 412 Windows 11, so that's the new piece to the puzzle here. Nothing really fell off, but you'll notice we added a Ubuntu to this list, and that will become more apparent in a few minutes. So again, these are where the industry is, what versions are currently supported by all of those companies. We just follow suit, that if they would drop support, we would drop support. Okay, and evidently we are getting more and more requests on certain Android versions because they've added a couple there on things that we've run through on those tests. So hidden gems, this is one of the pieces that our marketing folks love. This is just things that we added to Niagara to help the I want to say the cost of living, but to make my life a little easier, right? And so part of what we were seeing is people wanted to create tags and have a pick list of what that string tag would be. So essentially they added some enumeration into the tag so that I can actually have that pick list. So typically, if I had a string, I'd have to type it in exactly the way I want that tag to read, right? And if I made a mistake, I could have a couple tags with I spell Virginia wrong, and I would never get all of those tags that were Virginia because one of them had a misspelling. So here I can create an enum, and I can have the 2 or 3 states that I want to pick from, or the cities, and I can't type it in free flow. I pick from that list. So that is one of the things that also we needed to do and change to support Haystack 4 and things that are coming down. So some tagging improvements. You'll see some HTML components to be able to do the color picking from the HTML. A lot of that stuff is just stuff that we've done in the background to make life easier. So 413, all right. Whew. All right, we have 410, long term. We have 412, just released, has a bunch of features, and now you're throwing at me 413. What are you guys thinking? So this we're kind of putting out there so that you have an understanding that it's coming. This is sometime, late summer, but you need to understand why I'm talking about 413 a little ahead of time, and that is that there's some hardware associated with it, and that's that new Jace. So we decided that we can kind of show you that 413 will be in that same time frame. It will address that new hardware because there's going to be certain things in there that are different, and it's nice to know what's coming, right? So this is what's coming. You can't download this. They will have, if I remember correctly, there is a beta scheduled, but I remember seeing it, but I can't talk and look in my calendar at the same time, but there will be a beta open for this.
Late March, Kevin.
Everybody. There you go. Thank you. Thank you. So what does 413 mean, right? So 413, the key component that is important to understand why we're talking about it up front is that it will actually be the version of Niagara that will be running on this new piece of hardware. Okay, so if you're at ASHRAE or you've talked to us before, we have a new piece of hardware that we're essentially creating that will, help us in supply chain issues. The engineers have gone overboard to look at how the motherboard is designed so that we can take one set of chips, and if that set of chips can't work, we can take a different design chip, even though it has more pins in the motherboard, it accommodates that. So it's one of those things that we wanted to engineer this to be supply chain proof. And at the same time, we wanted to give, faster power, right? It has to always be faster. These things last for, decades. We want to make sure that we can create the next unit that's going to last the next decade. More RAM, more storage. But here's that key thing that was kind of interesting. It no longer will come with QNX. We're actually moving to Ubuntu for the core operating system on the device, right? So I previously showed you that 4.12 supported the long-term release of Ubuntu. This is part of that process. We're doing that because of speed improvements and faster security enhancements, right? So in today's world, we want to move much faster. And so we looked at those operating systems and what QNX was able to offer us and what Ubuntu would be able to offer us. And we've decided that this is an important move. And so the 9000 will be the first one to support that Linux-based Ubuntu operating system built into it. Now, to us as integrators, I don't even know that a Jace is running QNX. It's something that's invisible. So really, this isn't something that's going to change my workflow in any way. It's just, I know that for this particular device, that will be the first one that will be using that new operating system that we're going to build upon for future devices and things of that nature. You can already run our supervisor software in Linux. That's nothing new. So this is just saying, well, let's do it on the hardware as well.
Kevin, Mark, just
Okay.
a comment. As far as
Yes.
LinkSpring is concerned, we fully endorse and support the shift to Linux. And for many of you who are on the call, know that our Genesis Edge portfolio was designed and built right from the beginning utilizing the Linux platform. So again, we look at this as a nice next step for the Jace 9000. So kudos, Tritium. There you go.
Yep, we're catching up to you, Mark.
Exactly.
Hey,
All
Kevin,
right.
is it important to note that 413 will not run on a Jace 8000?
No, the 414 will run at a Jace 8000.
Oh, so you can run it on back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, no, you're correct. A 9000, this device requires at a minimum 413. You can't run anything. You can't go and run 412 on this or 4.9 or 411 because of the processor and the Linux requirement. Okay.
So I said that backwards. 413, 414 will run on a Jace 8000.
Right. All right. So let's take a look at 413 in some of our deployment features, right? So what we added this component called system database into Niagara, and we were all excited about it. And then you guys got your hands on it and you're like, oh, this is great. And then you're like, well, wait a minute. It won't look down or look at the entire Niagara network. It only looks at what's connected to it below, right? And so we were listening to a lot of feedback. And so what we needed to do is we needed to take the system database and make it multi-tier, right? And so part of 413 will introduce the ability to use the system database across an entire campus, right? It won't just look at what's underneath the Jace, it will look at the entire components of everything that's connected to that supervisor. So this is one of these things where it's another quality of life, and then that system database has a lot of advantages, and we can spend time just on why that will help implement system database in your customers, right? So it was a piece that helps remove some of the issues on why you weren't using system database, and it was because it was not gathering all the information there. So keep that in mind that it is there. It is one of these things where you're going to see me do some tech tips and Tritium talks just on this, because the advantages of using system database versus the old way is extremely powerful. This takes away, I think, one of the hiccups that you would have when you would try to implement the system database in a large organization. Especially when you look at, once I do this, I can start to bring up PX pages. I no longer have to push them up to a supervisor. It can just go gather them, index them, and send them up automatically. So huge piece of the puzzle. This was not easy to do in engineering, but they were able to do that and get that into 413. All right, so here's another reason why we wanted Ubuntu Linux as a operating system. And so one of the things that we're seeing is that a lot of IT enterprises want to virtualize in some form or fashion a supervisor. And our supervisors are pretty much what we call a monolithic application. It required Workbench and it required all of these components. And in the IT world, Docker is kind of a big buzzword that they want to use to actually run these virtual machines. And so we could, go into all kinds of conversations on why a VM versus a Docker is better. But what we needed to do as Tritium was to hear how IT wanted to implement these virtual machines and support them, right? So, you're going to hear virtualization and hypervisor, or I use VMware and I use those to virtualize it. What a Docker does is it allows us to use a technology that was really designed for cloud computing and be able to implement it in a container, right, that we can then offer to a customer. So why this is important is you'll start to see devices, right, that typically don't run Niagara that can run a container be able to get a lightweight version of this Niagara, which is what we call headless. Essentially, everything in a container means that there's no UI to it. It's all done by scripts, and so they can fire them up and tear them down. But this is one of those components that IT has been asking Tritium for. And so containerized Niagara will, again, come with a Ubuntu Linux. It will come with a component that is on the device that allows us to communicate with that. So the only thing that is different about this is that the container is self-built by us, right? We hand them a container that says this is Niagara, and then it actually licenses by a subscription. In the cloud world, that's how all of those little components work. So this will actually be something new for us in that it will be given a subscription, meaning that it will talk to a server that says you're good to go and you can run and the subscription is valid. So that's the only thing that is different about a container, other than that these are highly portable and that we'll start to see these things run on some interesting types of devices. Okay. So that's containerization. There is this licensing server that we had to stand online to do the subscriptions for that. So there's nothing new about that. Actually, let me go back. So this is new to you guys because normally we have our licensing server that is over the host ID. This is something separate. So those containers self-register and all the backend stuff would be done again in the community, but it's a very different type of technology. Okay, so think container, think a subscription license, and then usually it's for a very specific need that IT wants to have Niagara running in. So the other thing that I was wishing is, as you learn templates become more and more useful. And I started collecting a boatload of templates, but I had no way of organizing them. So 413, they were able to hear us and say, okay, we'll give you the ability to now organize templates. I could do this by making a palette, but once I created the palette, I couldn't edit those templates, right? So this will give me the ability to be able to organize those. And then it gives me the ability then to, again, continue to use these to bulk deploy and things of that nature. So we had to update the template and the deployment to understand that there are now folders in place so that we can actually have those work together. So this is one of those little hidden things that when I got it, I'm like, finally. So it's one of one of those things that if you use templates, you've been asking for it. The other thing we got along with containerization, right, is if a container has no UI and it's headless, we needed to have the ability to install Niagara without that dialog box popping up that says, okay, hey, I'm going to put it in this folder. Here's the EULA, hit next, and oh, do you want me to start the daemon, right? All of that is what stops a install of Niagara in its tracks, because the end user has to actually walk through those clicks. So part of being in this virtual world with containers and in the cloud is everything is deployed by these scripts, right? Things are brought online, they're brought downline. That's the world that lives in. In fact, I had to use the command line. I'm like, okay, this is archaic, but that's in the cloud world, in the VM world, that's how you live. That's how everything is done. So we now have a unintended installer for Niagara. So if you're IT and you're on here, you're probably going, finally, that's good. All right, so Haystack support, Haystack 4 support, I should say, is going to be in 4.13 as well. So I'm actually preparing a talk on this and some tips, because I'm the de facto tagging person, I think, on my team, because I do analytics. And so we'll have a new support for this in the industry. It will have a Haystack 4 dictionary and a way of combining the two. And keep in mind that the tag dictionary in Niagara lets you run as many tag dictionaries as you want, right? So they aren't destructive in any way. They build on each other. So for instance, Niagara has been tagging since the inception. And if you would do a query on n:\name equals, right? That's actually a tag that we apply with a rule in runtime. So this is all good. Haystack 4 allows us to do a lot more with the tags and identifying the information than we could with 3. 3 was very limited. A lot of times, I would say the majority of the customers would have to end up doing custom tags to tag their data, even if they use Haystack. And with Haystack 4, that actually removes that. The other component here in IT integration, and if you haven't figured this out, right, there's a big theme with everything that's happening in 4.13, is that if I'm a large organization and I have 2,000 JASes, that's 2,000 logs I have to watch. And right now I'd have to go visit 2,000 JASes to see these logs. And we've got you to separate the security audit, but now we need you to use our tools that we watch for intrusions and things of that nature. So 4.13 adds syslog integration. And this essentially says to the Niagara instance, instead of keeping the log to yourself, transmit it and replicate it to an endpoint, which is a syslog server. So I can have all 2,000 of those reporting to one syslog, and I can then automate scripts on that syslog server to watch for people that didn't type in their password, right? I can now be notified of a needle in the haystack that typically I would not go and try to harvest, right? So this is, again, another component that we really wanted to put in to accommodate those IT needs that are out there. So HTML5 station manager view is now HTML. So again, in this one seminar, we went from 4.10 to 4.12 to 4.13, and more of the components are there. You notice that the heavy lifting ones are the engineering ones, right? So this gives us the, before we had the device manager, now we have the station manager, and I can now connect to those and see all those components. So more and more, I think there's only maybe one feature I'll have to go check that we have to move into an HTML view, but we've got the majority of it there so that I can start to take advantage of WebWire sheets. So Niagara Analytics, one of the things that we've done for 4.13 is that we heard loud and clear from our customer base that we needed to have better documentation. And so in the last 6 months, the engineering team and the sales team all got together, and we actually went through all of the documentation and fixed the documentation, as well as added some real world examples. So this will actually see the day of light on 4/13. So that process, we took feedback from the field of what we needed to do with our analytics, and majority of it was, you got to have better documentation. I can't go and watch texts and tips all the time just to figure out what I'm doing. I need to be able to understand that within the documentation. So that has been done. It will roll out in 4/13, as well as we continue to harden the components within that, because that's now part of core. So connectivity, there's now, so if you're not aware, you probably are aware, because if you have a Niagara installation that sends emails to people for alarms, it stopped working, and you had to do a workaround where you had to create a special email, Gmail token to be able to get you to be able to send and receive email. So essentially, the cloud vendors for these emails disabled the ability to log into those systems using older authentication technology. They wanted everybody to use OAuth. So in 4/13, our email component will now support that type of authentication, so that I can actually send email and receive email without using special keys for those providers. Okay. So that has been fixed. OAuth is usually the keyword you want to go off of there. So the video framework, again, more HTML has been enabled. We do real-time streaming from the cameras now. We've added into the components of the HTML the ability to do the PTZ functionality. You'll see some updates when creating grouping and creating these perimeters when you start to sync these things from device to device. So those are our components that we've added to the updates on this components. And then when you look at security, specifically for 4/13, since certificates are becoming this norm, right? They're not quite there where everybody's doing certificates, but if you're in a Niagara installation, somebody's going to say, are you using device certificates? What we found with our UI is that if you were confused, if you're new to certificates, you need a little hand holding. And I'm like, I raise my hand, I always need hand holding when I do certificates. So what we've done is for our UI, we've actually added some tips that actually go a long way on what this is looking for, right? And so instead of just dropping you into a certificate lingo, we're doing that and then adding some UI, and you'll see that we're going to even make this even easier in the future, because there's going to be essentially Niagara needs to manage and help understand how to provision all of this stuff, because it's going to become the norm. This is something that we keep track of in the industry, and as that becomes more of a standard, we want to make sure that that workflow within the Niagara framework is as easy as possible. So certificate management is now, again, something I couldn't do unless I used Workbench. It's now HTML. So if you haven't figured it out, again, by the types of things that are being put together, is that our goal is that you should be able to administer and engineer all through the web browser, right? Which takes a lot of hurdles away from a lot of our enterprise customers that need integrators like yourselves to be able to support them. So these are the, they did a different graph, mainly just showing you the core. So this is normally the table that I had before with everything old and anything new. So the only thing you'll see is the same list. Nothing fell off the list, but we added Red Hat version 9, Ubuntu's long-term release 22, Windows Server 22. So I've had a few people that have sent me emails on that. So 4/13 will have that, and then VMware for their enterprise virtualization containers. Okay, so I'm going to briefly do this, and Paul is on the line, and he's going to talk about some of the hardware, but you've already saw a slide on this that talks through all of the HTML components that we're doing for the Niagara security. So Niagara Enterprise Security is getting some love internally, and there's a lot of things that we needed to get updated pretty quickly, and that was the HTML surveillance viewer, so I didn't have to rely on Workbench to be able to see the cameras and to be able to manipulate them. So that is now in place with 4.13. And then we also added an ability to look for access cameras, right? So just like I can look for a BACnet device and say, go tell me what this is, and it says these are the ones that aren't in Niagara, the access cameras have that same capability that we added to our driver, so that it's easier to find them instead of typing in IP addresses. And then again, for the components for the badge system, typically you have to have Workbench running. More and more of that is now HTML, so that I can do this from any workstation instead of going to that dedicated workstation. And then I'll let Paul jump in and talk about this specific slide.
All right, thanks, Kevin. So as you've seen from a lot of the slides, most of what we talked about today is things that are new, and nothing's constant but change. Niagara Enterprise Security has been a piece of our offering for a long time. I imagine some of you on this call know the traditional enterprise security with the R2R and the RIO modules. Our current offering is exactly that. It's an add-on license to Niagara Core. Coming soon, we do have a new controller that will replace the R2R and the RIO. That controller will come in 3 different formats: a 1-door, a 2-door, and a 4-door model. It's OSDP and Wiegand. OSDP is becoming the new standard, and the controller that we are using is one of the very few that is OSDP verified. By doing this, we take a giant leap from where we currently have been into lots of things like multiple reader class support, biometrics, QR code, mobile credentials that we haven't had up until now, and all of that is dependent on this new controller. As well as this controller's PoE, connectivity is Ethernet from the controller to the supervisor. And again, all of this is built on open framework. Hang on, let me, again, like I mentioned, it's 1, 2, and 4-door models. So that's kind of where we're at, and that's about all I've got to say at the moment.
Okay. So the other component you might know is that we've integrated sign capability within Niagara. This is one of those things that if you're a sign customer, you really wanted it. So what sign does is sign automates the registration of guests into your building. And so what would happen is I would register with sign, but it would not assign a security badge if they're using enterprise security. So part of this integration is that when I sign in, Niagara will get the queue from the sign server that Kevin has checked in. Niagara will assign a badge to me that I can then pick up and get me through the doors. So those two, when they talk, actually complete the complete cycle to completely automate when I check in to get the badge to be able to then have restricted access to certain doors. So this is one of those things when they started to show this, it was pretty cool. But if you're a sign user, this was one of the pieces to the puzzle that you, when you were using Niagara's enterprise security, you wanted to have done in the background, because it completely changes the workflow for the person at the front desk. So this is the Jace 9000. I kind of briefly talked about it in Niagara's 413. I had to show you the video. It's very cool. So what does this mean for us? And again, this is something that is coming. It's not available today. We are not going to stop producing the Jace 8s, right? This is something that will take a little while to ramp up. But the idea is that this device is designed that if I have a existing Jace in place, right, I can pull that out. The design hasn't changed so that I can plug everything right back into this one, right? So I was one of the ones who were like, well, let's make it look totally different. And engineering's like, no. The reason why it looks the same is so that if you pull a broken one out, this one fits exactly in the same place without any new connectors and new wiring, right? You just want to make it as simple as you can. So quad core, there is some cool capabilities with, you know, we put a faster radio in it. One thing I will tell you is that currently when you buy a Jace 8 and you buy the non-Wi-Fi SKU, there are components on the motherboard that, and in the manufacturing process, we disable. A lot of our enterprise and government customers really want that hardware gone. They don't want it to be on there at all. So with this new device, when you order without Wi-Fi, it will never have Wi-Fi. All of that will be taken off the board. So those are only some of the big differences that you should realize. It will have Bluetooth. I don't know exactly how we're going to utilize that, because there's another thing on here that is kind of cool, and they're putting a kind of like a machine learning chip in there. It's part of the chipset that we got for it out of the box. It's got some, you know, really no functionality out of the box, but it's something we want to grow into. So as people have told us over and over, edge analytics and edge computing is very important. We thought that that would be a good thing to have on the board so that we can kind of grow into that.
In terms of timing, Kevin,
So with-
Linkspring will have 5 copies of the Jace 9000 here in the next few weeks.
Yep, I got the boxes. Well, I didn't get the boxes. I thought they were the Jaces, and I was trying to steal one, but I got boxes instead. No, don't tell anybody. All right, Troy.
Yeah, the money slides, as Mark likes to refer to these, three programs or slash new products that we've launched within the last several weeks. The customer loyalty program, made a big deal at this at AHR. We're really pushing AX Jace trade-ins. So through June, we're offering a 40% discount on the Niagara Core software when you upgrade or trade in any R2 or AX hardware board. 40% on the core hardware, and then after June it'll be a 25% discount on the Niagara 4. We're giving a 5-year maintenance for the price of an 18-month SMA. Pretty straightforward. Host ID exchange, and we're trying to flush the market out.
Yeah, and AX is not supported anymore, right? Tritium is not going to create any software packages. So if there's some flaw that is discovered and we immediately patch it for our long-term release and then our feature releases, these AXs don't have any of that. So as you look at code signing and all of that stuff that we've added into the Niagara framework for IT, for large scale, for security, for protection, none of that's in AX, right? So this is a good program to take that existing components and hardware and get them up to date and secure.
Linkspring's team is fully trained up on this and pushing this program and selling it now. So
yeah, and I will add to your point, Kevin, as far as AX goes. I mean, since AX obviously was a good, sturdy workhorse for all those years, but with 4 out and all the new features and functions that have been enhanced and added to the platform, it's like night and day out there with respect to capabilities and cybersecurity and connectivity and all that. So again, we do encourage our Linkspring business partners really take a look at this program. And again, your business development folks are on top of this and happy to have this type of discussion with you guys where it makes sense.
Another exciting tool that we've released recently is the Enterprise Software Maintenance Tool. Finally now have the ability to synchronize 5+ Niagara licenses to a single end date. As Niagara has proliferated in bigger and bigger enterprises, the nightmare of popcorn maintenance, as I like to refer to it, and having to track all those individual expirations has now gone away, offering a significant discount in through the end of the year on 100+ licenses that get synchronized. Great program to take advantage of there. We're also, ignoring up to 364 days of expired maintenance that essentially happens when you synchronize these dates, either on the back end of the license, or the gap as we like to refer to it, or on that tail end to get those licenses to line up to a single date. Take advantage of that. LinkSpring has been selling this now for about 1.5 years, almost 2 years since this tool has been in beta. It's now fully out there and in the market. And lastly, an exciting driver that we recently released, I wouldn't say in partnership, but through the OpenADR 2.0 certification process, a driver that now allows a virtual top node, essentially a utility, to talk down to a Jace or a supervisor, and allows you, the system integrator or customer, to essentially take advantage of programs that are being offered for energy shedding and management, demand response, right, at the Jace or supervisor level. Very exciting, low cost driver, essentially priced it very aggressively to allow our customers to take advantage of that. It's available in the market. Buy it now.
Yeah, and a lot of times some of the organizations, the energy organizations, would pick up the tab for that. So keep that in mind too when you're talking to customers about that.
With that, I think that gets us through the slides. We've got 15-20 minutes to field questions that have been pouring in. I'm sure there's a number that have stacked up.
So again,
Matt?
Troy, Kevin, Paul, thank you very much. Greatly appreciate it. We'll have Matthew come on here and read a couple of the questions, but I got a question from somebody via email, and certificate management, and which seems to be a topic that's becoming more and more out there, et cetera. Does Tritium plan to have a Tritium talk on certificate management?
If there's, I know there's not one scheduled, but I will make sure I do that. I will take that as an action, because you are totally correct. In fact, on my board, I have some hot topics, and certs is one of the topics, along with getting my emails through OAuth. So
Good. All right. Good. All right. Matthew, do you have any questions on your end?
I've got some stuff popping up here. We've got Gary asking about the discount, the 40% discount. Is that for N4, Jace, 834, 834-5, et cetera, or only the supervisor?
It is for 834, yes. So it's the license that runs on an 834, right? That we're discounting the software that runs on an 8000 or 834 or Jace 9000 hardware board.
All right, an ESMA question from Mike. Can new additions, Jaces, be added to an existing ESMA?
Absolutely, yeah. You fold in new licenses that were set to expire beyond your initial expiration date. Those can be added at the next renewal cycle, and then that gap would be forgiven for those licenses. Any single license of Niagara is allowed one gap or one piece of grace in terms of those gap days.
All right, moving on. A question with the web browser capabilities. If we modify or wire sheets via the web browser, will be able to back up and restore stations via web browser?
Yes. So again, you have to have the right. So keep in mind that you actually have to enable that profile for me to actually get to the WebWire sheet, right? Because what we don't want is the customers getting to the WebWire sheet. What is this, right? So that functionality will allow you to do that as well. So once I enable that for that profile user, you'll get more and more of what you would traditionally expect in Niagara to be able to do that remotely. Can I commission? If that's your question, can I commission a Jace at this time? No, but in the future, yes.
Okay, next question. The Jace 9000, Mike is asking, boot time noted as 50% quicker. How about 80 to 90% quicker, he asks.
I have no idea how engineering came up with that number.
All right, let's see.
So basically subject to the individual programming it, right? How good they are, right?
Yes. His coding would be 80% faster.
Yeah. If I think it's the mic I think it is, then yeah, Mike, definitely on you, buddy.
All right, we got one from Aaron. Does containerization effectively make Niagara architecture agnostic, or will it be able to run on ARM?
So that's a really good question, because right now we are in beta, and if we've got somebody that has an ARM instance, we have to do something special. So you just don't take a container that's designed for x86 and run it on an ARM. So you do have to have separate containers.
But our release in June, we will support an ARM deployment.
Yes. Yes. But it's not like a it is something that you have to accommodate the processor in with these containers, which is standard. That's nothing new.
All right. Will Genesis Edge device have the co-processor that can take the load for MSTP communication for performance?
That one, I'm not sure on that. I will we'll take note of that and answer that. Let me be able to talk to our R&D and our tech team, and we'll get back to you on that answer.
Okay,
Good question, though. Very good.
We've got Jace 9000 running Ubuntu. Will legacy RS-485 drivers work like Ion, COM34, and such?
So I don't know if I can answer that question, because I don't understand the underlying pinnings. Our implementation of the Jace 9000 has a serial bus, right? So I think you're thinking maybe containerization, but the Jace will run just like a normal Jace 8 runs today. It will have the same integration interfaces. It will have the same coprocessors. It just has faster processors, and then the underlying operating system that we put on there, and then encrypt and all that, because we also get better encryption with Ubuntu than we do with QNX. All of those capabilities we take advantage of because we do that entire stack, that Niagara stack. Containerization is something different, right? Where you
and it won't support serial.
don't have serial support.
Will not support serial.
Containerized Niagara.
Matthew,
Containerized
let's,
Niagara, correct.
sorry, Matthew, let's do two more questions and then we'll, I think it's time that we go ahead and wrap this one up. And again, if you've got additional questions, just drop us a note, marketing@linkspring.com, and we'll be happy to get those answers for you. So let's do these last two questions, Matthew.
Okay, why is there so much padding margin used on HTML5 views? Can some of that be trimmed down to make the views more data efficient?
That is a great question, and I would suggest you would submit that as a issue through Linkspring to us, and we'll get engineering to take a look at that.
Okay, last one. What does the hardware support look like for the Jace 8000 in the future? Will it continue to be sold in parallel with the 9000?
Absolutely.
So basically,
For
there's
several
no,
years.
yeah, I was going to say, there's no, right now, there's not a true roadmap on when support for the 8000 will start to wind down and stuff. The fact that both platforms, the 9000 and the 8000, are going to be fully supported,
So
correct?
no projected end of life then?
I don't think
It's a
it's,
few years out. I think there's a date. We can follow up with that date, but it's several years down the line, and there's plenty of Jace 8000s in stock at this point.
well, again, thank you. This concludes our webinar today. Thank you, Troy. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Paul. We'll be sending all the attendees a link where you'll find a recording of today's session. And from all of us at Linkspring, thank you. We appreciate your continued support in business. And until next time, thank you.